This is Postscript News, cutting through the noise one headline at a time, quick, clear, unfiltered.
Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to try to get to the bottom of 5 pretty big stories that are in the news right now, and I think it's going to be pretty fascinating to see how they're all kind of interconnected.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So first up, we're going to be looking at U.S. trade with a focus on all the tariff stuff.
Okay.
And then we'll take a look at what's going on in the cryptocurrency market and see what Bitcoin is up to these days.
All right.
Third, we'll head over to Japan.
Oh, wow.
And take a look at what's happening with rising rice prices over there.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a big deal over there.
Yeah.
Fourth, we're going to talk about a new U.S. ambassador to Israel and what that might mean. And then finally, we'll look at how the U.S. government is starting to really take aim at Meta.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it and start with all the trade and tariff news.
All right, so I think what's really fascinating here is the kind of shift in tactics that we've been seeing from the U.S.
Yeah, like President Trump just announced a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs.
Right.
For most countries, so it sounds like things are cooling down a little.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, it does look like things might be de-escalating a little.
Okay.
But just to clarify, these reciprocal tariffs are basically those tariffs that countries impose in response to tariffs already in place.
Yeah.
So it's just this back and forth.
Right, okay.
So now there's this pause, which means that kind of tit for tat is easing up a little bit for a lot of America's trading partners.
Yeah.
But there is this really big exception, and that is China. So the announcement was very specific that Chinese goods will still face those 125% levies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if we look back a little bit, this all comes after China recently unveiled their own tariffs.
Okay.
84% import tariffs on U.S. goods.
Yeah.
So it seems like while a lot of countries are getting this temporary break, the trade tension specifically between the U.S. and China is actually intensifying.
And the markets are really reacting to this. And cryptocurrency prices jumped, like Bitcoin went up almost 5%.
Wow.
Ethereum more than 6%.
Yeah.
And XRP by like 10%.
Oh, wow.
And stock prices also saw some big increases with the S&P 500, Dow Jones, and NASDAQ, all showing gains of more than 5% and 8%, respectively.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is, the markets really want stability and predictability. And the Treasury Secretary, actually, Scott Bessent, made this really insightful comment. He said that the market now understands that a temporary floor has been established. And there is this like huge craving for certainty.
Gotcha.
So I think what this shows is that all this uncertainty around the tariffs was really weighing on investor confidence. But this pause, even if it's just for 90 days, it provides some clarity. And the market seemed to be very enthusiastic about it.
It is interesting, though, that Secretary Bessent also mentioned that the reversal on most of these reciprocal levies wasn't just a reaction to falling stock prices. He actually said it was more because of the response by mostly our allies who have been operating in good faith. So it sounds like there's a diplomatic dimension to this decision.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely indicates that the administration is paying attention to the concerns that our allies have about these tariffs. And that kind of makes you think, is this like a real strategic shift in how the U.S. is approaching its allies? Or is it more of a tactical pause while they're really focused on this trade relationship with China?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that, Congress is also getting involved. Senator Chuck Grassley has been pretty vocal saying that
Congress has actually been giving presidents too much power when it comes to trade.
Yeah, and I think his perspective is really interesting because it comes from a constitutional standpoint. He's really emphasizing that the U.S. Constitution specifically gives Congress the authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce. So his argument is that over time, through different laws like the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 and the Trade Act of 1974, Congress has kind of accidentally given away too much of this power to the executive branch, meaning the president.
So even though he has these concerns about too much presidential power, he does seem to support President Trump's goal of trying to get other countries to lower their tariffs on U.S. goods and to strike a better deal with China.
Yeah.
So it sounds like he's worried about the process, but agrees with the desired outcomes.
Exactly. And
Senator Grassley isn't just talking about his concerns.
Okay.
He's actually co-sponsoring a bipartisan bill that would try to limit presidential trade authority going forward.
All right.
So this bill would require congressional approval for any future tariffs.
So it sounds like a pretty serious attempt to rein things in.
Yeah, and I think what's really notable is that it's a bipartisan effort.
Oh, wow.
There are all these prominent Republican senators who've signed on to this bill.
Like who?
Mitch McConnell, Jerry Moran, Lisa Murkowski, Tom Tillis, Todd Young, and Susan Collins.
So yeah, that's a pretty big signal that Congress might push back a little.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the legislative branch wants to assert its authority over trade policy.
And in the meantime, Senator Grassley himself is taking this kind of wait-and-see approach. He's actually questioned whether the administration's main goal is to get better trade deals or just to make money for the Treasury. He's made it clear that he's in favor of the trade deals. And then on top of that, you've got the U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer, saying that their approach is going to be country by country with the goal of reciprocity in trade.
Yeah, I think that the country by country strategy suggests that they might be taking a more targeted and differentiated approach. Maybe treating allies differently from competitors. But they're still really focused on this idea of reciprocity. Making sure that other countries are offering similar access to their markets and similar trade terms as the U.S. offers to them.
So now let's shift gears and talk about cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. Matt Hougan, who's the CIO of Bitwise, has a really interesting take on how these trade actions and tariffs could actually be good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a fascinating connection. He argues that the Trump administration actually wants a weaker dollar, even if it risks the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency.
And he actually pointed to a speech by Steve Miran from the White House Council of Economic Advisors, who said that these so-called persistent currency distortions are because of the dollar's reserve function. And that it's hurting American manufacturing and working-class families. This is a pretty big statement.
Yeah, it really gives us some insight into why the administration might be okay with a weaker dollar if it helps in other areas of the economy. And that's where Bitcoin comes in. Hougan thinks Bitcoin could benefit from this in both the short term and the long term.
How so?
So in the short term, he points out that Bitcoin historically has this negative correlation with the U.S. dollar index, or DXY.
And for those of us who aren't financial experts, what does that mean?
Basically, the U.S. dollar index is a measure of the dollar's strength compared to other major currencies. And what Hougan is saying is that when the dollar gets weaker, Bitcoin usually goes up in value and vice versa. So if these trade policies make the dollar weaker, then Bitcoin could get a short-term boost.
That makes sense. And what about the long term?
Yeah, so in the long term, he thinks we might see a shift to multiple stores of value with Bitcoin playing a key role as this scarce global digital store of value that's outside of government control.
Yeah, that's a pretty big claim.
Yeah, it's a really interesting vision of how the financial landscape could change. The idea is that if things get more uncertain in the global economy, and we don't just have one dominant reserve currency, then investors, individuals and institutions, might start looking for alternative assets, like Bitcoin, to protect their wealth. And this actually ties into Bitwise's prediction that Bitcoin will hit $200,000 by the end of the year.
That's a big number.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold prediction.
And he actually reiterated that $200,000 prediction.
He did.
In his recent investor note.
Yeah.
And in a Bloomberg interview, he said that he expects the dollar to weaken because of all this trade uncertainty and the tariffs. And he explicitly called Bitcoin a hedge against fiat currency debasement.
Yeah, he really sees Bitcoin as a safe haven in times of economic turmoil.
And he also brought up the fact that more and more institutional investors are getting involved.
Yeah.
And that regulations are becoming more favorable towards Bitcoin.
And he even thinks that governments themselves might start owning Bitcoin.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing if you think about it.
It would be a huge step towards mainstream acceptance of Bitcoin.
Okay, so bottom line, Bitcoin's price surged after the tariffs pause was announced. Some reports say it hit $81,300.
Right.
And others say it was around $76,959.
Yeah, so it definitely jumped up.
Yeah, and that does seem to support Bitwise's analysis that
it does.
Bitcoin could benefit from a weaker dollar.
Yep.
Oh, and there was also some breaking news about Ripple.
Oh, yeah.
They apparently won a big legal case, and their CEO confirmed that their case with the SEC is over.
Okay, so that's big.
Definitely something to watch.
For sure.
Okay, so let's move on to something totally different. Rice prices in Japan.
Yeah, this is an interesting one.
Yeah, it really shows how important these basic staple foods are.
Yeah.
And when their supply or their prices get messed up, it can have a big impact.
Yeah.
Both culturally and economically. And like we said before, rice is a huge part of Japanese culture and cuisine.
It is a cornerstone
of their diet.
People eat it with almost every meal.
Yeah.
And they use it in so many different products.
Yeah.
It's not just sushi.
Right.
They use it in traditional sweets and even to make sag.
Yeah, and I even heard that McDonald's has rice burger buns in Japan.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So when rice prices go up dramatically, like they have, the average price of a 60-kilogram bag has increased by 55%.
Wow.
In just 2 years and reached about $160 last year.
That's a big jump.
Yeah, it's a big problem over there.
Yeah, and it's because of a few things.
Okay.
Bad weather, heat waves.
Okay.
And then also the constant threat of typhoons and earthquakes.
Right.
All of those things make people worry about whether there will be enough rice for everyone. And the Japanese government has responded in a pretty big way.
Yeah, they decided to release 210,000 tons of rice from their national reserve.
That's a lot.
It is.
Over a fifth of their entire reserve.
Right. And this reserve was actually created back in 1995 after a really bad harvest.
Oh, wow.
So they've had it for a while.
Okay.
They've also had to dip into this reserve after the earthquakes in 2011 and 2016.
Okay.
So it plays a really important role in making sure they have enough food during emergencies.
Right.
And it's not just Japan.
Oh.
A lot of other Asian countries that rely on rice, like India, Vietnam, and Thailand, they also have these rice stockpiles for the same reason.
Wow.
China even has a reserve for pork to keep prices stable.
Interesting. Okay, so back to Japan. The first auction for this rice, 150,000 tons of it, happened last month. And Japan's agriculture minister, Taku Eda, said publicly that rice prices are exceptionally high. But he also said that people shouldn't worry too much and that he expects prices to go down as this reserve rice hits the market. He also suggested that some of the price increases might be because of supply chain issues, even though there seems to be enough rice overall.
Right. So that's interesting because it suggests that the problem might not be a shortage, but just a difficulty in getting the rice to the people who need it.
And the rice from the auction has already started showing up.
It has?
In some supermarkets, like trial holdings in Kyushu.
Okay, cool.
So the government's actions are having an impact on how much rice is available right now. But it sounds like some Japanese consumers are a little skeptical about the quality of this reserve rice. Some people are calling it old rice.
Yeah, there's a housewife named Emi Uchibori, who said that she stocked up on rice earlier, and she's not that interested in buying the auction rice. And then there's another consumer, Yuko Takiduchi, who said she'll only buy it if it's much cheaper than regular rice, because she really cares about the quality. And she's noticed that prices for other staples like flour, bread, and pasta have gone up too.
Yeah, so it sounds like even if releasing this reserve rice helps bring down prices a bit, it might be hard to convince people to actually buy it.
Especially when everything else is getting more expensive, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from food security in Japan, let's talk about this new U.S. ambassador to Israel.
Right. The Senate just confirmed.
They did.
Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee as the new ambassador to Israel.
Okay.
The vote was 53 to 46.
And this happened just 2 days after.
It did.
Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the White House.
Yeah.
Governor Huckabee is known as a strong supporter of Israel.
Yeah.
And this position could be super important right now with all the stuff happening in the region.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Like the conflict between Israel and Hamas, tensions with Hezbollah, and the threats from Iran.
Yeah, I think in this situation, having an ambassador who really understands and supports Israel is seen as really important.
Right.
But it's also interesting to think about this confirmation in light of Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent trip to the White House.
Okay.
Apparently, he came away empty-handed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So maybe they don't agree.
Right. There might be some disagreements on things like tariffs and Iran.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, during his confirmation hearing, Governor Huckabee said that he would carry out the president's priorities.
Right.
Not his own.
But he also has a history.
He does.
Of strong opinions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah, like in the past,
right,
he supported Israel's right to annex parts of the West Bank.
Okay.
And he prefers to use the term Judea and Samaria.
Right.
And he's long been opposed to a two-state solution.
Wow.
And he's even questioned the term Palestinians.
So these past views could definitely influence his approach as ambassador.
Yeah, and potentially even U.S. policy.
Right.
In the region.
Yeah, so even though he said he'll follow the president's agenda, his own beliefs could still play a role in how he handles things.
Yeah, and some people have suggested that his confirmation might actually be a bit of a relief for Israeli officials, especially after that complicated White House meeting.
Okay, so it sounds like they see this appointment as a good thing.
It seems like it.
All right, finally, let's talk about the U.S. government going after Meta.
Yeah, this is huge.
Yeah, it's a really big deal. It is.
In this whole debate about the power of big tech.
Yeah.
So Meta is actually going to trial next week.
Right.
And the government is accusing them of abusing their market power by buying Instagram and WhatsApp.
Right. It's the Federal Trade Commission or FTC that's bringing the case.
Right. And this trial could force Meta
to
actually sell off Instagram and WhatsApp.
Yeah, that's a huge possibility.
Yeah, that would be crazy if those platforms became independent from Facebook.
Oh.
And apparently Zuckerberg has been trying really hard to get the Trump administration to settle instead of going to court.
Right.
He's reportedly visited the White House, donated to the inauguration fund, and even changed Meta's content moderation policies to make them more appealing to Republicans.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the current FTC chair, Andrew Ferguson, seems pretty determined.
He does.
He told The Verge that he doesn't think the White House will intervene. Right. And that the FTC is committed to enforcing the laws.
Yeah. So it really sounds like
it does.
They're going to see this through.
Yeah. And a law professor at Cornell, George Hay, actually said that he doubts Trump would be persuaded that Zuckerberg deserves a break at this point.
Yeah. So it seems like a settlement is pretty unlikely.
Okay.
Especially this close to the trial.
And this is just one of 5 big antitrust cases that the U.S. government has launched against tech companies.
Right.
They're also going after Google, Apple, and Amazon.
Yeah. It seems like they're really trying to address these concerns about monopolies in the tech sector.
So what exactly are they saying about Meta?
Well, their main arguments are based on internal communications from Zuckerberg, where he apparently said that Instagram was a really scary competitor.
Right.
And the FTC is also saying that buying WhatsApp was another way for Meta to eliminate competition.
But I'm sure Meta will fight back. What are they going to say?
I think they'll argue that they invested a lot of money and made a lot of changes that turned Instagram and WhatsApp into the huge successes that they are today. And they'll probably also point out that the FTC approved these acquisitions in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And they might also use the fact that the FTC has lost some other cases recently against tech mergers.
Yeah, so it sounds like it could go either way.
It does.
The judge in this case, James Boasberg, actually said that the FTC faces hard questions about whether their claims will hold up in court.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, the trial is expected to last at least 8 weeks.
Wow.
And Zuckerberg and other Meta executives are expected to testify.
It's going to be big.
Yeah, definitely a landmark case.
Yeah, for sure.
So, wow, we covered a lot today.
We did.
And it's amazing to see how all these seemingly unrelated stories are actually connected.
Yeah.
We've got trade policies affecting global financial markets.
Right.
And even influencing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Then we have geopolitical events impacting diplomatic appointments. Japan's rice situation shows how fragile food security can be.
Right.
And then we have this ongoing battle over the power of big tech companies.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah. It is.
It makes you think about what the future holds.
It does.
I mean, what's the role of traditional financial systems going to be in the future alongside these new technologies like Bitcoin?
Right.
And how will these trade wars and a potentially weaker dollar change the landscape of global finance? And what part will digital assets play for both individuals and institutions?
Yeah, those are big questions that we're going to have to grapple with as we move forward.
Definitely a lot to think about.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.